Hello, you're listening to the Saluki Gamescast. This is episode 94 for Friday, October 11th. Oh, so close to Friday the 13th, 2024.
Next time.
Wait, it can't be next time. Next time will be the 18th of October.
Didn't we had one this year already, didn't we?
Yeah.
Or did we not record that day?
I honestly don't remember.
Yeah.
I feel like we would have said something about it if we recognized it.
I feel like last October had a Friday the 13th,
Yes.
right? Because I went to see Alice Cooper
Yeah.
on that day.
Okay.
So, which is one of those dates I remember because it was Alice Cooper on Friday the 13th in October. It felt like the ultimate time to see Alice Cooper.
All the stars had aligned.
Right. And then he still didn't do the theme from Friday the 13th part 6, which was disappointing.
Honestly, the audacity to not do that.
That's a miss. That's a fumble right there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I wanted to hear it. I'm not sure anybody else at that concert cared, but
Look, if I could go to the Sonic Symphony in October and they did Pumpkin Hill because it was October, I feel like Alice Cooper could do Friday the 13th theme on Friday the 13th.
yeah, it's the man behind the mask. It's not a great song, but it's
fitting.
I was saying, but the
Thematically,
timing.
it's fitting. I feel like, yeah, you probably should have played it.
Yeah.
Also-
Doesn't even matter if you
So
only
Alice
did, like,
Cooper, when you listen to this podcast on the next time you do a performance on Friday the 13th, play that song.
Yeah.
I feel like it was one of those that the video was in rotation on MTV
Oh, yeah.
at the time. So like I remember it like really vividly because I loved Friday the 13th as a kid. Like I still do to some degree, even though those films are terrible.
I'm just, when you say kid, how young are you talking?
Oh, well, I don't know when that film would have came out. I would have probably been around. I would have been around like maybe 7 or 8 when that film came out.
Friday the 13th is Jason, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So
It blows my mind that children watch horror movies and enjoy them.
when I was under 3, and I would have to check the release date. I think it might have been 81, so I would have been 2. My mom took me to see The Fog, and she tells this story because she took me along with my brother and his friend. I don't know if I should say his friend's name. People who know him would be able to identify him by his name. But anyways, the story she tells is I was a little kid. You know, I was young enough
I'd say you were like toddler or littler.
Yeah, I was young enough that she had me in her lap, right? Like just watching the movie. And that my brother's friend, by the end of the movie, was crawling into her lap. And she said, so now she has me in her lap and like him. And they were older. My brother's like 7 years older than me. So.
Okay.
They weren't like little children. But then I still remember going to see Nightmare on Elm Street in the theater, the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and that's like 84 or something. So I would have been like 5 or so when I saw that. The outcome of that, if you're wondering, is that horror films do not bother me at all. I am not scared at all watching horror films. I don't like really particularly gross graphic horror films. Like I have no interest in watching the Terrifier movies just because they're known for being extremely like graphic and gross.
Yeah.
And that has no appeal to me. But like something like Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th for Halloween, Scream, like those films do nothing. They have no real effect on me when I watch them. Like I love them. I find them very entertaining, but like they don't scare me.
Dang.
So, yeah, I was scarred emotionally as a child. I mean, if we're going to be like blunt and honest about it.
Desensitized early.
Yeah. Apparently. So, anyways, welcome to our introduction to the Saluki Gamescast. My name is Justin Young. Joining me, as always, are Alicia Utecht and Mario Sanders. How are you guys doing?
Doing good.
Yeah, doing pretty all right.
We should say, Alicia, you had your show last weekend. Congratulations.
Thank you.
The show went well. I think both of us made it out to see the show.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you. Yeah, it's weird. Normally when I finish a show, I'm exhausted and I don't want to think about it for at least another month. And like I just don't want to do anything. And this one I'm like, what do you mean I'm not doing it again this weekend? Like I could literally do this for another month. I had so much fun doing this show.
That's always great, right? Like it's great anything that you put a lot of time into. Your reaction after it's over isn't, "Oh my god, I'm so glad that's done." But yeah, I mean, theoretically, you might take this show to like conferences and stuff. I know that.
Oh yeah, I've already been talking with Johnny about traveling the show and like how to make that happen and how to make it work. Because, you know, there are a couple of things that'll be tough to fly with. You know, the wig. I don't really want to squish that down to be able to fly with it, but I would love to travel this show. I would love to do that. So anyone who runs a performance venue who's listening to our podcast, hit me up.
Have you thought about, and if you don't want to talk about this on air, that's fine, but have you thought about something like Saluki Con?
It's crossed my mind. I'd have to actually converse with the people who run it to figure out if it would even be plausible, but it's crossed my mind for sure.
Yeah, because
It definitely seems like it would be a good fit.
yeah, I mean, specifically SalukiCon because it's here and you're a Saluki, and that would make a whole lot of synergistic sense and everything. But like, I was also just thinking like comic book conventions would be the sort of place that you could take it outside of traditional performance festivals.
Well, I think something about that would probably be so fun is people, you know, I think the great thing about your show we talked about was the fact that your family was there and you got like all of the input from them and their response to it and their memories, you know, that both align and maybe like the differences from your memories of these moments.
Right.
And I think the very cool thing is I imagine at a like comic book convention type of space, you would probably get so many people who after the show it would allow for them to like enter into that reflexive space, I imagine, with their friends or family or like the people that they share that fandom with. And I think that would be very cool.
That would be. And like, you know, you were there on Friday night and heard like there's a part where I talk about Neil Adams, who's one of my dad's favorite comic book artists. And, you know, in like the Kleinau space, I'm like, I don't really expect everybody to know who Neil Adams is. So let me explain. But at a Comic-Con, there'd be a lot more people
get
like
other people losing their minds.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those situations, right, where like maybe you don't have to explain who Neil Adams is. You just say the name and they automatically know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always interesting. Like as a teacher, that's an issue you run into. You like use an example and you're like, okay, let me give you some background, some context, because I know you don't know what I'm talking about, or most of this class doesn't. That's a situation where it would be other hardcore comic nerds who would like know all the references you're making, or most at least.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that would be possible, I don't know how you would go about it. I don't know if you would want to go about it. You know, there's already a semi-interactive component to the show, at least like the entrance of walking in, it being a like convention sort of setting.
Yeah.
I feel like you could definitely make it an even more interactive space, and like potentially even opening up that space for people to share some of their own stories, like in a type of setting. I don't know if that's something you would want to do, but I think that there is definitely an avenue where you could take this show and almost like create like workshops and those types of like settings as well, for like not people to create their own shows, but like people and like reflecting in their memories and sort of the development of their like fan identities.
Yeah, that would be really cool. I feel like that would be easier to bring to like a Comic-Con or something, because my hesitation on bringing it to a Comic-Con is like, if people walk into that panel, it is not what a typical Comic-Con panel looks like.
Sure.
You know, you don't typically go for performances. You go to like do interviews and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
So, but something like that, if I could build with that and like have that on like day one and then the performance on day two,
Sure.
Yeah.
that would be really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it would be just like the wording, the presentation of how it's being pitched to people, like so that they know what they're getting into. Because I think the really fun thing about the show, like I think it's a good show, but I think the thing that really stuck out to me is like what I was not expecting as much going into it was the way you really leaned into this presentation as a comic con, right? Like sort of situation. And so like, from, the, our badges that we wore in and everything with the lanyard, and then like going in and you greeting us and the tables on display and everything. So I feel like people at a comic book convention, like you're sort of like easing them into it because you're giving them something extremely familiar that like they're going to be familiar with. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to use this as a way to talk about my experiences with particularly comic book fandom, some about Sonic the Hedgehog for some reason.
Only when a particular audience member asks about Sonic the Hedgehog.
But I think I think that would make people more comfortable than a traditional like performance studies show. Yeah. Right? Like they're going into something where they're like, I already understand this format and I'm going to understand what you're talking about because you're talking about the same stuff that theoretically somebody at a comic book convention has experiences with, right? So I think it would be really accessible, like far more than, most performance study shows would be. Yeah. Even like most of the formatting of how some shows have been.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it as compared to like Fangirl, which would also probably fit a space like that really well. But I think the sort of FamCom,
it's less accessible.
Yeah.
That show would be slightly less accessible to somebody. Is my opinion.
No, I would agree. I think both of them fit, but they would have a very different feeling if you were to walk into one. And I think like I said, the ways in which Comically Close can be made interactive and even more interactive, I think something like that would be very cool.
So we didn't mean to turn the entire podcast into a talk back on your show.
No, I love it though.
But yeah, it was a very entertaining show, and I think Mario was exactly right. Like part of the fun of it was your family, because I know Christina was sitting by me, her and Sandy, and the three of us were like, you would say something and it was like, oh, that's interesting. And then your family would jump in and like, you couldn't help but laugh at their reactions at times or their input at times.
Yeah.
And so that, that added like this whole other layer to the show, like, right. That made it feel more interactive than, certainly a traditional show.
Yeah.
Like even some of your other shows have felt, right?
Yeah. No, it was really delightful to have them there. And it's funny, I recorded reactions after each night. And after the first night, I was like, I don't know why I didn't expect my family to jump in like they did. Like I knew they would recognize the memories once I started telling the stories. But for some reason, I was not expecting them to jump in and like tell the stories with me. And I'm like, I know my family. I don't know why I didn't expect this. But it made it feel alive in a really fun way, I think.
Well, and I think I think that's kind of to Mario's point, right? Like you make that show feel like it's inviting that. Mm-hmm. And so like the fact that your family who is very comfortable with you, right? Or somebody who might be interested in your feelings on Sonic the Hedgehog would be comfortable with you makes it, the way that you present it and set it up makes it feel much more comfortable to jump in. Mm-hmm. And so I think those people most familiar with you really obviously jumped in early, but it made other people who, may have been people who knew you. I didn't know all the people. But like it at least made them feel more safe. Like this was the acceptable thing to do. Cause it's,
yeah,
there are always people who are going to a Klein Now show for whom that is their first Klein Now show. Yeah. And they have no set of expectations of what it's going to be versus a traditional theater
I was like, well, and even a lot of Kleinow shows, that's not the expectation.
Right.
You know, the expectation is the fourth wall is there. And this one, I'm like, fourth wall? That's like past the tech booth.
Yeah. Well, let's not make the entire podcast this, but like it is great to talk about that. And congratulations.
Thank you.
Very entertaining show. Let's see. So I had a meeting today at Starbucks. We were talking about this leading in. I said I would tell about this. So I go over to Starbucks. I don't drink coffee. So I'm always looking for what does Starbucks have this month that is not coffee that I can drink here. And so they had this drink and it said, it is our energy tea drink.
Oh dear.
And I was like, oh, okay. Like I like tea and like, this is like fruit flavored. Like, okay, cool. Like I'm good with all of that. It was like mango blast or something. I don't know. Anyway, so like this is what I order. And first off, like the woman asked me, what size do you want? And I'm like, I don't know, small. And immediately somebody from the back of the store goes, it's only grande, only available in grande. And I was like,
is this a Starbucks on campus?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm not trying to to like shame anyone.
No, that's.
But anyways,
no, it just feels like the Starbucks on campus.
Yeah. So anyways, so I get this drink and it's grande, so it's huge. And I go sit down and I take my first drink and it's like, this is fruit flavoring on like distilled caffeine. And so like the first drink, I'm like, holy cow, what is that? And so for those who don't know me, I do not drink caffeine hardly ever. Like at home, I don't drink caffeine. So I can go like weeks with no caffeine in my body. I don't
You
drink.
went for the energy tea.
And I was just like, wow. And so then I was like very hyped up. And so this meeting lasted like about an hour and a half. And then I came back and I ran into Christina in the office, who we should say Christina is losing her voice. That's why she's not on the podcast this week. And then I talked to her very briefly, and then I talked to Mario, and then I had to go teach a class. And I was like, all right, I'm really raring to go. So like when I get home, I'm going to try to do a quick run, but like that's not going to be enough. I can already tell you. So I'm going to have to figure out other ways to burn off energy between now and bedtime.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful.
But yeah, like that first drink, I was like, it was like, like burning through my like veins.
The real question is, did you drink the entire thing?
I did drink the entire thing because I'm not a smart man. No, like here's the problem.
You're going to be going all weekend.
Like here's the problem. And I don't know if parents still do this as much, but like I certainly blame parents of my generation for this. When I was a little kid, my parents just drove into my head, if there is anything on your plate, you had better eat it. You eat everything off of your plate. And so like now, like, and okay, you want me to get off on one of my controversial opinions? One of my controversial opinions is the reason that there is an obesity epidemic is there are lots of little kids who are raised being told to eat everything on your plate. And now when you go to a restaurant, your plate is massively huge, overfilled with food. And there are people my age who are like, well, I've got to eat it all. It doesn't matter that they gave me 10 pounds of mashed potatoes. I've got to eat them all or somebody's going to yell at me. And, like, even when my mom is not there, somebody's going to yell at me. Somebody's going to find out I didn't eat all my mashed potatoes. And so I'm going to eat them all, right? And so like the same thing, like if I order a drink, unless that drink is making me gag, I'm going to drink that entire drink. I can't throw any of it out. Like that would be wasteful. There are children in Ethiopia who are starving to death.
I definitely, when you said you blame the parents of your generation, I definitely thought you were going to go with I wasn't allowed to have caffeine as a kid, so I just don't.
Yeah, I thought that was going to be
do.
caffeine.
No.
Related. But
I mean, like when I was a kid, I was not allowed to have Coke at dinner. Mm-hmm. So like you had to drink like tea, like not energy tea, like just regular tea, or you had to drink like milk or water or something, but you weren't allowed to have soda at dinner. Mm-hmm. we were limited in the amount of soda we were allowed as kids. We were allowed it, but like we couldn't just sit and drink.
That's not to blame. It's the clean plate.
Hey, like that is one of my theories. It's one of those theories I don't bring up a lot to people, but I'm like, I think this is part of the problem. It's like you parents like yelling at us. You drilled this into our head. And so like now when I go and, you know, like McDonald's is like, here we shoveled fries into your bag. Like I have to eat all those fries. I'd be wasteful if I threw any away. So I don't know if everybody feels that way, but I feel that way every time I like eat out somewhere. Yeah. So there's Justin's rant of the week. Because I'm high on caffeine. This isn't the last rant you're going to hear this week.
I was going to say, this is going to be a fun episode.
I don't know if fun's the right word, but it'll be an episode. Mario, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. It was a good week. I think I had said I went to WWE again on Monday.
Right. How'd that go?
It was a lot of fun. That
was a Raw taping, so the big show, right?
Yeah, last week was also Raw that I went to. So, you know, and I think the thing that was funny about this week is Raw is typically 3 hours live. And from last week to this week, they had said for this week, we're going to 2 hours. And, you know, like, all right, that's fine. And so I was thinking, oh, you know what? Last week I stayed in Evansville just because I've never made that drive before. I didn't want to drive it super late.
Right.
I've made the drive from St. Louis back to Carbondale more than enough times, so I don't really think twice about it. So like, oh, I'll drive back. And I was thinking, I was like, oh, it'll be nice because it's only 2 hours. It will be, I'll get home even earlier than I would have thought. That the show starts at 7 and it's over by 9. I might be home by like 11:30 at the latest. So the 2 hours goes, the show ends, and then they said, and now we're starting our second episode because they were pre-recorded. They pre-taped next week's Raw.
Oh, right.
During that. So it was 4 hours instead of 2 hours. So
I thought you were going to say they were doing like an NXT show immediately after. Or something.
No, NXT is on Tuesdays, which is also in St. Louis. I did not go to that, but
well, I thought they might have pre-recorded it or something.
Yeah, but no. So I don't know if it's. I assume it'll be next week's Raw, but yeah. So they pre-recorded it. So rather than it being shorter, it was even longer than anticipated. So I got home at like 1. But it was a lot of fun. So, and don't worry, no spoilers for what's happening next week on Raw.
I do want to know, will we see you on TV if we watch it?
Not in that one. I was literally on the very top row and the top section and the very last row. I did catch a glimpse of myself the previous week, but I will not make any sort of indications as to where you should look because as soon as I saw myself, I was like, oh, dear God.
It's like that danger of hearing your voice for the first time recorded, and you're like, that's not what I sound like in my head.
A big part of that was just the cost of the tickets. The Evansville arena being so much smaller that there were closer tickets that were probably the same price as I said, being way up at the top in Enterprise, just where the Blues play.
Yeah. Well, so I've got a question of interest, and you don't have to give spoilers about the storyline, but you watching the recording of 2 back-to-back Raws, were there gaps between the storylines, like where other things are happening throughout the week? Because I know they keep Raw and SmackDown mostly separate, but there are other shows going on during the week that might alter storylines from one week to the next?
Not really. Like I said, I think SmackDown and Raw are pretty separate, so you didn't get that. I think the only thing that will be interesting is one person, actually 2 people who are typically on SmackDown made appearances this week. So I would be interested if there's any sort of allusion to that of like who is like if there's any allusion to like, whoa, you might see us on the next thing that like people would not, So this week SmackDown might allude to we'll be on the next Raw or something. Maybe. So like, because when they announced, so-and-so is here, like, oh, okay, they're not on Raw. They're not usually here. And then one person is like, they opened the show, giving a promo, and she calls out the person that she's feuding with. And, so people are expecting that other person's music to hit. and it's this person from SmackDown, their music, and I think all of us were like, what the hell?
Right.
Why is she here? But it was very fun. I think the one thing I'm most interested in watching, though, is if the way that we saw it live, if like the ordering is going to be different in how it's presented.
Sure. Like how they'll edit and...
Yeah, if like certain segments are in the same order. And part of me thinks that it won't be, because so the person who's the champion had a match at the end. He was in the main event of the first episode of Raw, and he makes an appearance in the second episode, but it was at the very end of the episode. And so part of me wonders if, they give him time to like, go shower and rest a little bit. He didn't have another match, but, he's having his feud with a person. And so they make their appearance, but the thing that happened before that, the match that happens before that more felt like the main event. Mm-hmm. So I will be interested to see if that interaction between those two is placed earlier in the episode.
Yeah, that is interesting. And for people who don't watch wrestling, like the WWE is fantastic at editing. Mm-hmm. Like their packages that they put together are like really top quality, like better than like sports packages, like the professional sports, like the NBA and stuff. They're better quality than them in a lot of cases. And I think people who aren't into wrestling don't realize like how good the team behind the scenes is at putting those shows together.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can completely see like what you saw and then what actually comes out being very different looking and having a different feel than being there live.
Yeah. And even though I will have been at the last 3 episodes of Raw, I watch it on Discord with friends on Wednesday nights usually. And so I didn't really watch as much this week. We were watching it together. I was on a phone call. But next week we'll watch it. And so, like I said, it was very interesting just to see, people on the first episode, they're like in a car leaving the arena, but then they make an appearance in the second episode. It's like, we just saw you leave. Right. And so, certain things of like,
well, you mean wrestling's not real?
It's unbelievable.
I'm shook.
Immersion broken. Kayfabe is dead. No. It was a lot of fun. It always is a lot of fun.
You mean they didn't really like blow up Mr. McMahon?
No, they didn't, surprisingly.
Maybe they should have in hindsight. All right. Well, that is your one wrestling topic of this week. Okay. Like you spent it already.
Wow. So I was scammed. I was scammed out of using my one. That's fine. I didn't play any wrestling games this week.
Somehow I feel like it might come back up later. So we'll just see.
Which is because the Friday night game for the N64 was the ECW game, but I didn't play it this week. So there you go. I don't even have a chance to talk about that one.
All right. Well, we'll see. Well, when we move into what we've been playing, Alicia, what have you been playing?
So I finally got to turn my Switch on again for the first time in a literal month.
Oh, wow.
And I finally beat the Ace Attorney Spirit of Justice, the special DLC case at the end. And oh my gosh, I just love this. I love these games so much. I mean, I will never get over how well they do. I'm that person who's annoying when you watch a movie with me because I'm calling the plot twists and I can't keep my mouth shut because I want other people to know I was right before it happens. So the beautiful thing with this is my sister's already played the game, so I can send her my thought by calling the plot twists, and she knows to keep her mouth shut. But there's a twist in this case that I sent to her, and then another detail gets revealed, and I'm like, this is everything. This is exactly why I love this series. It's not the kind of mysteries in like Sherlock Holmes terms, where when you read a Sherlock story that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote, you get nothing. Everything, you get none of the details to have the chance to put anything together until Sherlock explains it to Watson at the end.
Right.
Whereas here, like, you get enough details to put things together, but not so far ahead of the characters that yelling at them for being dumb for the rest of the game. And even when you've put together, like, okay, this is who did it, this is why they did it, you get another turn that makes it hit that much harder. And you get another turn on this is how they did it. It's so well written. I'm obsessed still. And I'm very excited. Now I get to go play the Investigations games now that we have the official US release of those.
You have not played the Great Ace Attorney games, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit Investigations next because that one I've already been spoiled on like who the characters are in that one. Whereas
Sure.
Great Ace Attorney, I know it's like Phoenix's ancestor, but I don't know.
Yeah, so sticking with characters that you know, and that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah, I feel like those games are, to date myself, those are in the sort of like Encyclopedia Brown tradition of you read this story and you should be able to figure it out by the end, like before the actual answer is revealed to you, which is, you're kind of talking about the difference with Sherlock Holmes where, you're supposed to think, oh, look how brilliant he is. I could have never figured this out. Well, all the pieces weren't there for you.
exactly. Whereas this is like you said, Encyclopedia Brown or Ellery Queen, where it's like you get all the pieces, you can piece it together, and you can't piece it together so far in advance that you're screaming at the characters for being dumb. Because that's my other big problem with a lot of movies in particular, but also a lot of books that I've read lately, is like I put it together within the first third of the book, and then I spend the next 2/3 yelling at the characters for being dumb, and they figure it out in like the last 5 chapters or whatever, and I'm like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me?
Well, it's the Law and Order problem, right? Where Law and Order in the early seasons was like really sort of fun at like catching you off guard with a twist. But like you watch Law and Order now, if you've watched enough of that show, almost instantly like, oh, well, the sister did it. Because that's why else is she in this episode?
Yeah.
Except to
Sure.
like be the criminal, right? And so you kind of figure out the formula, how it works. And that show I still think Law and Order is great. Like that show becomes slightly less interesting.
No, Psych had the same problem. I think every murder mystery show has that problem
Right.
where it's like, okay, you always know the first person they go after isn't really going to be the killer.
It's the Columbo problem to
Yeah.
some degree, yeah.
Yeah, but these games just do it so well where even when you can figure out who the killer is fairly early on, there's enough that you still don't know that keeps it interesting. And like there's twists that I'm still I played Case 5 3 months ago, and I'm still shook by the twist that you find out during the trial of that one.
Yeah.
'Cause that, oof. Oh, but yeah, and the other really fun thing about the DLC case for this though is like we get to see a lot of old friends. It's not really a spoiler to say, Maya comes back in this game after not being there for games 4 and 5. You kind of expect that you're going to get to see Edgeworth, but there are some other old friends that you get to see who you haven't seen in 5 games or since the original trilogy. And so it's just really delightful getting to see them and see how they've matured or not.
Right. Yeah. I think that's interesting about like the, that's really difficult, I imagine, to write.
Yeah.
Like from a writing perspective, to write a story that either doesn't hold back details from the audience, but also doesn't allow the audience to get too far ahead of the main characters so that, like you said, it especially in a video game where, okay, I know this, so now I'm just having to go through motions to get you caught up to where I am. At least in like a TV show or a movie, you can kind of still enjoy, some of the elements of it. You can kind of like lay back and turn your brain off for the rest of the thing. But like in a video game, you're still having to be active in it. So, I think you're right. That's part of the success of those games.
Yeah.
And I haven't played them all like you have, but and what I have played, that feels like part of the why those games are successful, because you do feel like you do always feel like an active participant in them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you played the original trilogy, but not the Apollo Justice trilogy, right?
Yeah. So like I played the original Game Boy Advance game, and maybe I played the second one, but like I didn't play any of the Apollo games.
Yeah, it's like what I think is so impressive is they've been doing it since the first game. You know, it was something that happened in the first game, and they're still pulling it off successfully. And I'm like, dang. Y'all are still getting me after all these games. I'm so happy.
And, I would be really impressed, too, by, like, the fact that those are translated games.
Yeah.
So you're not only having, like, some of the elements of the puzzles, okay, that makes sense, that's going to translate. But, like, you're also having to, like, the way things are worded, you're having to be very self-aware of that so you don't, like, lean on something too heavy or give something away. And you're having to translate that from the original Japanese into English.
Yeah.
Which makes, your normal translation issues with video games even more challenging, I would imagine.
Yeah.
That would be I'd be interested to read if there's like an interview with the translation team to like see, like, does that make their job significantly harder translating those games over, say, the Monster Hunter series?
I feel like there must be at least something from, because, Investigations 2 has a fan translation that's been, the only English version for so long. So I feel like at least that team has to have talked about it.
Yeah.
Sure. I'd have to look into it after I beat the Investigations games because, I said, I know characters. I don't know plot, and I don't want to know plot till I get there, but.
Sure. All right. Is that it?
That's been the big one. Still, I did lose my Wordle streak. So I'm sad, but still doing like Wordle and I'm getting better at connections.
Yeah.
I think I'm at like a 48% win rate or something like that. So that made it up to a 4-day winning streak.
Nice.
I feel like connections is like a crossword puzzle. The more that you do them, the more you start to understand the logic of the people who are writing those puzzles.
Yeah. I was really mad the other day because they had 4 that were Blossom, Buttercup, Bubbles, and Mojo, and I was like, this is Powerpuff Girls.
That's your bait.
Right.
It absolutely was the bait, and it absolutely got me.
Yeah. They catch me on those sometimes where I'm like, oh, that's really clever. And then I'm like, damn you, connections people.
That said, Powerpuff Girls does feel like slightly obscure enough that it might not be.
Yeah.
But whenever it's like, well, this is 4 NBA teams, and there's no way that's what it's going to be.
Yeah.
Grizzlies and Raptors. No, I know you're tricking me. Yeah, it makes you really paranoid doing those because you're like, even when you see one, you're like, oh, well, that's obvious. And you're like, no, it's got to be a trick, right? Like, how else can these like work in with these other clues? And
or like they'll have something.
Sometimes you psych yourself out.
Yeah. Or like they'll have something where I'm like, I know one definition of that word, but then they're using another definition. That I'm like, I don't know this definition. So how am I supposed to know that this goes with the other 3?
Right. Yeah. Or it's something like it's a homonym, and so they're using the other version of the word.
Oh my gosh,
right?
yeah. The other day it was like words that appear in the Do Re Mi song from Sound of Music, and I was like, how on earth was I supposed to get that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they make some real leaps of logic in some of those puzzles where I'm like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
Like, ain't nobody outside of your brain is going to figure that out.
Which, as a fellow Easter egg placer, I appreciate. But as a player, I'm like, bro.
Yeah. All right. Mario, how about you? What have you been playing?
So I finished up Castlevania, Circle of the Moon. Overall, I'd say it's pretty good. I don't like it as much as Aria, but it's also... I can see where Aria builds on it, like in terms of the development. I think my biggest issue with it is probably the low drop rate of the cards. Again, if the cards are going to be your like big mechanic for this game, let people have the cards.
Yeah.
One of them has and your luck stat can increase it, like the drop rates. but when the drop rate is like less than 1%, there's one of them that's like a 0.6%. I'm just like, well, I guess I'm just going to come in here and kill this enemy over and over and over again. So I think that's probably my biggest frustration. And I'm part of me wonders if in their design they knew those drop rates, and so they expect people to grind for those cards, because the leveling, I think I was under leveled the whole game, based on like looking at stuff of like recommended levels that people were talking about. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm way lower than what people should be, until I found like one really solid like experience grinding farm spot. I was under level, like 10 levels under leveled for a lot of the game.
Yeah.
And that just makes it rough.
Yeah.
And I think my other issue, maybe not issue, but again, playing Aria first, which is so significantly different, like colored my interpretation. That game is like a survival horror game with how few healing items they give you.
Yeah.
Like, holy moly. If I didn't have the card combo that healed you, I don't know if I would have made it through certain sections of that game.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm thinking back to playing that game, because I played it when it originally released on the Game Boy Advance, and then I replayed it like a couple of years ago or something. I forget exactly when it was.
Yeah, you'd mentioned that.
Yeah. And yeah, it's a difficult game. You know, like all those Castlevania in the Metroidvania style, like I think they're all accessible, but like that one is more difficult than a lot of the ones that have come since it.
Yeah.
It's more punishing, might be a better way to describe it than difficult.
Sure.
I'll say one of my favorite YouTubers has done playthroughs of Aria and of Circle of the Moon, and whereas Aria, I'm like, I want to play that. Circle of the Moon, I'm like, I'm so glad you played that, because I sure am not.
Yeah.
And I think like replaying it, that was one of the things that it reminded me of, like, oh no, this game's actually like really difficult. Like that's why I maybe didn't like it as much as Symphony of the Night. The first time I played through it was that I was running into places like you're talking about where I just got incredibly frustrated with the game. And you talking about like the leveling up and everything, I think that's also an issue. Games of that era, I feel like, had that issue a lot of not necessarily making it clear to you as the player where you need it to be in order to like pass through this section of the game. And I feel like game design has gotten much better about that, of, you know, sometimes in a very subtle way, signaling to you like, oh, you are not prepared to enter this area of the game.
Yeah.
Sometimes very explicitly. Some games are like, no, you should not be here if you're under level 60.
Yeah. And I don't know why they decided to not do it in this game, but I don't know any other Castlevania game where after you kill a boss, it doesn't heal you.
Right.
But the fact that it doesn't heal you, and then you have to go like traverse the rooms before to go back and heal. Again, if I didn't have some of those cards where like the boss has basically taken out all of my health, and I'm like, well, one potion that you've given me, you know, be off of a random enemy or off of a random candle, I'm going to need that 20 health to do a lot of work here, or I'm changing all of my equipment to get my defense as high as possible.
Yeah, I feel like that game, you know, having just played through the Lost Crown, Prince of Persia, is that, you know, that game is designed very much like you think. I think a lot of Metroidvanias, like, there's going to be a save spot right by the boss.
And in most cases, there's you're going through one room maybe,
Right.
Or not even the entire room. Like, you're just like the top floor of the room.
Right.
But that was not always the case.
Right. And so I think you're right. Like, that game has that issue more, where like more modern Metroidvanias, you sort of take it for granted that there is going to be a save spot that will replenish your energy. And so you're not going to beat that boss and then immediately die and have to redo it all.
Oh, there's one section in particular where it's like particularly bad, where you have to go through like 7 or 8 rooms from the save to the boss. And I'm like,
I think I know that part you're talking about.
Yep.
It's and I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. There's a warp room. So I used the warp room, took a different save, and just went through that section. Well, you still got to go through like 3 or 4 rooms to get to, but at least
it's 3 or 4 instead of 7 or 8.
Well, and like at least the first room is like level 1 enemies that like if I take damage, it's 1 health. I'm not worried about that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not going to make a difference at the end of the day, most likely. But yeah, that section I was looking, I was like, do I go back to the save room to try and heal? So there were so many times I was like, well, let me put this card combo on. I'm going to heal as much as possible. And I'm just going to sit here, wait for all of my magic to regenerate and do it again.
Right.
And so it's like, it felt like I cheesed it in that sense because I had a friend who was also recently playing it. They didn't have that card combo. And I'm like watching them play like, you are such a better gamer than I am. I don't know if you've level grinded or what, because I don't know how I would have made it through this game without that.
Yeah, I feel like in those sorts of games, sometimes you get to a situation like that and you're like, did I miss something?
Yeah.
Like there's got to be something here I'm missing. And Lost Crown does not have a lot of those moments. There's maybe like 1 or 2 moments in that game where I was like, have I missed something in this game? Mm-hmm. Like I need to go back and explore because obviously I am going about this the wrong way. And I feel like older games when they were kind of they're still figuring out that formula. Like that's the second Metroidvania Castlevania game.
Yeah.
If you don't account, Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest. And so I feel like they were still figuring that out and like what is not just cruel to the player. Mm-hmm. And luckily, I feel like most games have figured that out now.
Yeah. So I finished that. Overall, I do think it's a good game. I think I can't like enthusiastically recommend it the way I would like absolutely recommend Aria to basically anybody. I have never played Harmony of Dissonance, the 3rd Game Boy Advance game. I want to play it at some point, but I think if you're a Castlevania fan, you should play Circle of the Moon, but know that it's a hard game. Like it is not an easy game. But the other thing that I played, I kind of bought on a whim yesterday, is UFO 50.
Yeah.
And so I've played a few of the games in that thus far.
You should maybe explain what that game is.
Yeah, so UFO 50 is made by the people that made Spelunky, or at least most of the same team that made Spelunky. But what it is a collection of 50 games that is essentially supposed to, it's in the same vein of like, what is it, Atari 50? Is that what that collection is called?
Yeah.
It's in the same vein of Atari 50 where it's these 50 games that are like highlighting what is this fictional development company's history. Mm-hmm. And they're created in the style of like NES era games. And from what I understand, all of them were created with the same restrictions as games from the NES. I think the only 2 things that they didn't include were sprite flickering and lag or slowdown.
Right.
Which the developer basically said, we thought that would make it a worse experience.
I say that's a quality of life thing.
Yeah. But so I've played, I think 3, maybe 4 of them, and I think it's very cool that like they've created this whole like fictional company and they have like a little history blurb about each of the games. And they're like, some of them are shorter, more arcade experiences, but from what I've heard, some of them are like, one of them is like a 60-hour RPG or something like that. So,
dang.
These were designed to be like as if they were full games that would have come out during that era. So this isn't like 50, Mario Party mini games or something, or 50 like, here's a taste of what this full game might have been like. This is like, this game might have actually been released as a full price, like $50 game in 1988.
Yeah, these aren't WarioWare games, which I think people maybe thought that that's what it was going to be, or the majority of them might be like that. It's like, nope, this is, they're not long. Like they said, NES games aren't like, they didn't have much space to work with, so you typically don't have these like super long games, but you could totally put like a couple hours, like if you're going for a high score on some of them beyond just beating them. how long it can take. And people are like, this one game in this 50 pack might be my game of the year. Like that some people were talking about. And so
Dang.
I've had fun with it. Like I said, I'm looking forward to exploring more of it. I think I've been thinking that might end up that might be what I do for our like game of the year list, is like a ranking of these 50 games as compared to, I haven't done as much of the N64, just been a busy year. But I might do something like that of here's what I think are like the best of the UFO 50 games.
I like that you always give yourself like the biggest task for your game of the year list. Like it's not enough to do your top 10 games. I need to rank 50 games at least.
Well, see, he needs an A on the final in the video games class this semester, Justin.
These two are not related.
I don't know. Do you get to propose your own final project? Can that be it?
I mean, I guess I could have, but I didn't have the game at that point, so I won't. I'm doing something different. But it's a game. I think I was hesitant to get it because one, I thought it was closer to a WarioWare, so I didn't want to necessarily spend. I think it's $25, which honestly isn't that bad to begin with. But I didn't know if I would want to spend that unless there was like a sort of more story to it. But after I've watched some people play it, and I was like, I kind of bought it on a whim. And I think it's a lot of fun so far, and I'm looking forward to playing more of it.
Yeah, I've really wanted to play that. It seems like a game right up my alley.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've been playing other stuff, so I was like, I'll put it off. There's no reason to buy it yet. Mm-hmm. I can buy it when I have time to actually play it. But yeah, I mean, I think that just the diversity, the creativity in the sort of games, like a lot of them that I've seen are like, yeah, okay, that looks like this game from that era. Mm-hmm. Like it fits in with that, right? Like this is a platformer. Yeah, this is inspired by Mega Man or Super Mario Brothers. But like to do that 50 times, right? Like there's a reason that game has taken like, I forgot if it's 8 or 10 years.
I think 8 years.
Yeah, to develop. That's a huge undertaking.
Yeah. So for the next few weeks, you'll probably hear about me talking about different UFO 50 games.
That's cool. Like, I'd be interested to know what are.
Yeah. So here's the general of UFO 50. I'll get more specific about the games here moving forward.
Cool. That way, I'll know which ones to play.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
All right. Let's see. I have continued to play some of the things I've talked about in the past. I'm sure I will kind of try to come in and do a wrap up on some of those when I finish with them. But the new thing that I played this week was G.I. Joe, The Wrath of Cobra. So I didn't even know this game was coming out.
I'll say this game sounds vaguely familiar to me.
Yep. Maybe we talked about it on here, but like I don't remember.
I mean, I also had a period where G.I. Joe was my obsession, so that might be why it sounds familiar.
I'm open to being potentially as wrong as could be. Is this like a tactics game?
No.
Okay. I don't know why I was thinking there was a recent G.I. Joe like tactics style game. I'm probably way wrong. That might not exist, but anyways, please.
That would make perfect sense, right?
I was going to say.
Seems like the right property for it. Each character would have different abilities. Yeah. But no, this is not. This is a side-scroller beat 'em up.
Okay.
In the style of like the Ninja Turtles game that came out a couple of years back, Shredder's Revenge.
That's also a cool property to do. Again, each of them having different abilities. That's cool.
So I think it is 6 players at a time. So also like that Ninja Turtles game. It is done in a sort of, I think it's trying to look 8-bit, but it's really 16-bit, like sort of pixelated graphics and stuff.
Are you playing with people?
I have not yet, though. So I will talk about the fact that I think it would be a better game with like multiple people.
Okay.
But like
most of those side-scrolling beat 'em ups are.
Yeah, I mean, the original Ninja Turtles arcade game is a better game with multiple people. Like that is a more fun game. That is the way you played it in the arcade because there was always a line of people to play that game. So playing that game at home by yourself is not the same or ideal experience for that game. So I think that's very true of this. I do not think this is as good a game as that Turtles Shredder's Revenge game that came out a couple years ago. In fact, I played some of that. I downloaded the DLC for that game and was playing some of it because in part I wanted to like, am I remembering right? Was that game better than this one? I think it is a better game. It feels more authentic to that era. Of course, that game is very much a tribute to the original Ninja Turtles arcade game, that and Turtles in Time, the follow-up. So this does not feel like the mechanics are as good. It feels like it feels like enemies are just running onto the screen. You're just beating them up, and there's not a lot of challenge. There's not like mixing up the way that you do things. So it never feels like you're doing the thing. It's as challenging as you want it to be. I would also say that the impact in hitting enemies never feels as crunchy as you want it to be. Like it never feels like you're making that level of contact in, say, a Final Fight has, right? Where like when you hit an enemy in Final Fight, you're like, oh yeah, I felt that connection, in the way that the characters react and the way that the controls feel. This never has that. So that makes it a less than ideal version of those games. That being said, this has an original animated intro.
Okay.
Where they have some sort of like sound-alike 80s like rock anthem playing over it.
Okay, I have to look this up.
And like the animation is clearly done digitally, but like they are trying very hard through filters to make it look like 1980s G.I. Joe animation. And that's really cool when you boot it up. Like this is the first thing that you see in the game. And then there are some introductions where they have it fully voice acted. So like they have, your main characters, Duke and Cobra Commander and everything. And that's disappointing because it is not the voice actors from the original cartoon. I'm not sure those voice actors are still alive. In fact, I think
Cobra Commander definitely, because Chris Latta died in the 90s.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the Cobra Commander, that voice actor particularly died because he was the voice actor for, Starscream?
He was also Starscream. He was also Wheeljack. Well, I mean, he got dropped from the TV shows post-movies because he kept getting arrested for getting drunk, but he died in the 90s.
All right. Well, you know his history a lot better than I do.
Remember, Transformers was my hyperfixation for a while, as was G.I. Joe.
But anyways, so like, you're not getting that voice. And I would say the voice actors that they got are not, I hate to beat up on somebody, but like these are a step up from like 90s voice acting in video games where it's like we got Bill from accounting to come do a voice, but it is also like not at the level of what you expect in modern games. Like you are not getting a Nolan North quality voice acting in this for the most part. I would say that also adds a bit to the charm because a lot of those 80s cartoons, they would have one or two really great voice actors, and then you kind of move down the line and it's like, well, we got this person and they're doing a voice and it's not maybe the best.
Yeah.
And so there is like some amount of charm to that. And the other thing that's incredibly charming about this is if you are somebody who grew up with this, particularly like not just the cartoon series, but like the toys, every G.I. Joe toy appears in this video game at some point, even if it's like not necessarily like at one point you're battling, like here's the Cobra tank and you are battling it. Like it drives onto the screen. You're having to fight the tank. But like even in the background sometimes, like you're at one point fighting a level on like the Cobra helicarrier that's in the cartoon. And in the background, there are planes flying around that are toys from the cartoon series. Or there are, the game starts at the G.I. Joe base and there's like vehicles parked in the background. And you're like, I remember that toy. I had that toy. And I had a friend in college who has like all the G.I. Joe toys. Like he's a huge collector. He like has been collecting them for years. His like basement of his house is just like G.I. Joe toys, like lining the walls and everything. And I was playing that game just thinking, oh, like John would lose his absolute mind playing this game because, you know, you're constantly going like, oh, they have the pit vipers there, and now they have, you know, the rat troopers, and so like all the enemies that you're fighting are from the game. Like the bosses are the major characters, so you have like the Baroness and Zartan and, you know, Dr. Mindbender. You get to choose among 6 different Joes. So like there's Gung Ho and Roadblock and Scarlet and Duke and all those sorts of characters.
Please tell me Snake Eyes is one.
Snake Eyes is in there. So like you can play as Snake Eyes. Have I fought Storm Shadow? Storm Shadow's definitely in the introduction. So obviously you're going to fight him at some point.
Was G.I. Joe originally a cartoon, or was it originally something else?
It was originally a toy line that they made a comic book and cartoon to sell.
That's that's what I was wondering, is if it was originally the toys that they then, like, these are super successful, so they just did everything off of it, or if it was
I think
the show first.
The very original toys are from like the 60s or 70s.
Yeah,
and that was just, you know, that was just, you had the Air Force G.I. Joe, you had the Army one, you had the Navy one.
So originally G.I. Joe was meant to be the boys' version of Barbie. So original G.I. Joes are Barbie doll sized.
Okay.
And they were really designed so like you could dress them up in like their uniforms and, you know, their different accessories. Mm-hmm. And then like the modern G.I. Joe that we think of as the little 3-inch action figures, that comes about in the 80s. And when they introduced that in the early 80s, they, as what would become the norm with like Transformers and He-Man and all those, you know, things, they were like, oh, well, we need some way to market this, right? Like we can't just put this on the store shelf. We have to market it in some way. So they actually made the cartoon as basically a 30-minute advertisement. So there's actually an episode of G.I. Joe that is so fantastic that they have characters go into this alternate universe where like the Baroness is a good guy.
I remember this episode.
And then when they come back at the end of the episode to our universe, they just leave some of the G.I. Joes behind in order to fight with her. But that was entirely to write them out of the show so they could introduce new toys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the same reason they killed off a bunch of Transformers in the movie. Right. They could bring in new characters for new toys.
That's funny.
Yeah, so like if you watch the Transformers movie, like the first 10 minutes of that.
all of
the new one?
Right.
No, the 1986 one.
I was about to say, I was like, what?
And the response was so bad
film.
that there was so much backlash that they were going to kill Duke in the G.I. Joe movie. And the response to Optimus Prime being killed was so bad that they were like, we cannot kill Duke.
Yeah, so like if you watch that original animated film, like the first 10 minutes of it are them just like killing off all the Transformer characters that have been introduced up to that point. And it's like really brutal, like to watch it. Like as a kid, you're like, it's kind of like blowing your mind because like I saw that movie in the theater when it originally released, and you're watching it going, "Holy hell!" Like they don't do this. You don't kill characters off of a cartoon series, and they are just killing people left and right. And you kind of know they're killing them because they're like showing like them.
It's pretty gruesome.
You're watching them get shot and like explode, and you're like, whoa, like you don't do this in cartoons. And so, yeah, that was a way to introduce new toys, right? So yeah, like all those 80s shows, when you go back and watch them, it becomes really apparent that they're just 30-minute commercials for the toys.
And PSAs in the case of G.I. Joe, because now we know, and knowing is half the battle.
As I say, I think my real only familiarity with G.I. Joe, obviously, other than knowing what it is the like, was it those parody PSAs that got made?
The ones they dubbed over.
Yeah, pork chop sandwiches.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, like, for me, I am enjoying it a lot just going through the levels and seeing all the references.
Sure.
And not just the references of the obvious characters, the, like, main villains and stuff that you know, but, like, the references to here's all these vehicles and everything. So, okay, I'm going to spoil one thing in it. There is a level in this game that is set in Springfield, which if you've watched the G.I. Joe cartoon, Springfield is the fake city that that Shipwreck ends up in. And like that episode of G.I. Joe, when you're a kid watching it, is the biggest sort of like mind fuck as a kid, because Shipwreck wakes up in this town and then like people's faces start melting, and like it's like Shipwreck is on this bad LSD trip, and you like find out that these are all synthoids and they're not like real people, and they've built this, Cobra has built this entire fake town that Shipwreck is trapped in, and they made an entire level of this game set in Springfield. And like while you're playing through it, like you're walking by these like little suburban, like idealistic 1950s homes, and then you walk by one and like the facade has fallen over and it's like backstage of a film set or something. And it's very, today I guess the reference people would get would be like the Truman Show. Like, but they built this into this level of the game, and you're just like, this is a reference for people who get it. So like the thing I would say about this game is it really feels like it's made by people with a love of that original animated show. So this is not for people who like the live action movies with The Rock and
Do those people exist?
How many of those have they made?
They only
2?
made the 2.
Okay.
Because they were so, but the
I didn't
end,
realize The Rock was in it. I
he
think
was only
Channing
in the second
Tatum was in
one.
it.
He was
But
in the second one. But the end of the latest Transformers movie teased that they're bringing back live action G.I. Joe.
All right.
Yeah. So, anyways, this is very much a love letter to the original G.I. Joe, the original cartoon, those toys from the 1980s. I mean, this is tailor-made for me, right? As somebody who liked G.I. Joe, played with those toys as a kid, had those toys, in a lot of cases wanted those toys that like there was no way my parents couldn't afford to buy me all the G.I. Joe toys because they were just pumping out like endless supplies of those. So it's really cool to like go and play this. It's also the sort of game where you kind of almost feel like you can almost make endless DLC of new characters that you could download and put into this game, because there's part of me that's playing it going, this would be really cool if I could play as my favorite characters in this.
Sure.
I could play as the Valor Stealing Sergeant Slaughter in this game. Like, I don't know that they would actually do that with Sergeant Slaughter today because of some of his problems. But, there are, it feels like a really cool nostalgia bait. But I will say that the people making this did it the right way. In that I don't think it's a fantastic game. I feel like Shredder's Revenge got that more right. It is not only nostalgia bait, but it's also a really fantastic game. This feels like it's a pretty good game, but it gets all that nostalgia in there as well. And I do think it would be better with 6 people playing it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice to know that, like, yeah, even if some of it is nostalgia bait, that it feels like it's being created by people who care about this franchise, or at least have done their research, that it's not like, here's this G.I. Joe game.
Yeah, I mean, they put out a G.I. Joe game a couple years ago, I feel like. That game wasn't particularly great, and it felt more like, well, we can get this property, and we can throw out some of the stuff, here's some references, here's some remember wins for you fans. Whereas this game feels much more like we are going hardcore into this. And, arguably, this may be the best G.I. Joe game outside of like the Commodore 64 one and the arcade game. Like, I think those may still be better games, but like, there's been a lot of G.I. Joe games over the years, and this is pretty good. A lot of those games have been terrible over the years. But this one's pretty good. So if you like G.I. Joe, like I got to talk to my friend John, because like I think he would just lose his mind in the fact he has 2 kids. He could get them to play with him.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
I think and he could say, hey, remember that toy's downstairs.
You can look at that.
You can go downstairs and look, don't touch. But yeah, I mean, it's a neat product.
Cool.
So I do have to say too, because I looked up, because I was going to look up the intro to watch it later. The lead singer on the trailer song, on the song for it, is Johnny Gioli, who's the lead singer of Crush 40.
Oh, is that who?
Yeah.
That is not too surprising because it has that same sort of like pop anthem overdrive feel to it, right? Like, and that's very appropriate, right? I mean, for that era and everything, especially you watch the G.I. Joe movie, the opening to that.
Oh my gosh, it's iconic.
Like the pop song that they recorded specifically for that. I am assuming at some point, they have not shown this, but I am assuming at some point Serpentor shows up in this game. So we haven't gotten there yet, but I would be shocked. Like, that is the character that a lot of people would be desperate to see. But yeah, fun game. Maybe not one I would recommend to everyone, but if you're a big G.I. Joe fanatic, if you like that Turtles game, I think you'll get at least some enjoyment out of this. All right, let's move on to news. So Nintendo has gone woke. Nintendo this week, there have been rumors. There have been an FTC filing, FCC filing that Nintendo was making a new piece of hardware, and that it was using the 24 gigahertz MUMO frequency. And all that people knew is that it was like a little sort of like square, roundish device. And people were like, what could this possibly be? This is obviously not the Switch 2. Like, the technology doesn't make sense with it. And this week, out of nowhere, Nintendo announced, hey, we're making an alarm clock.
Named Alarmo.
Yeah, so the actual official name of it is the Nintendo Sound Clock, Alarmo, which is just the most insane name for a product.
I saw this within an hour and I sent it to our group chat and I was like, this feels like an April Fool's prank. Why is this coming out in October?
Yeah, so right now, only people who are Nintendo Online subscribers can order it. They are going to, in next year, in the spring, they're going to have this at retail, they say. So theoretically, you can walk into a store and buy this.
Yeah, they've already sold out the pre-order in Japan.
Yeah.
Which is just wild.
Yeah, in Japan, they've moved on to a lottery system for the second wave of those. But it is $99, which is really high for an alarm clock. But we should know like what this thing actually does. So it is an alarm clock with a sensor on top. It's not just a traditional motion sensor. So like this is basically the technology they use at airports. So like they can actually sort of get a mapping of your body using this technology. And so they're using that so that they can monitor your sleep in bed. So you're supposed to set this right next to your bed and point it towards you, and it will monitor your sleep. So it'll track your sleep, like how much you're moving around in bed and everything. And then in the morning, it will start going off, and the more that you move in bed, it responds to you. So like it will have, like, for example, so there are different themes, but we'll take the Mario theme. The Mario theme, it will play like Mario music for you to wake up, but then the more that you move around your bed, it'll do more coin sounds of like the Mario coin registering. And it'll do that more the more that you move around till finally you stand up, and then it'll play like a little triumphant thing that you have gotten up out of bed to reward you.
Or if you take too long, it starts having Bowser come after you.
Right. Like it'll switch over to Bowser if you're not actually getting up out of bed. But then they have multiple themes in this. So they have like a Pikmin theme. They have a Splatoon theme.
They have Breath of the Wild.
Yeah,
because everyone in the comments is like, imagine just like waking up slowly, and then you've spent too long waking up, and suddenly the Guardian music starts playing.
Right. And so then they also announced as part of this that they're going to have downloadable themes. So they announced, I know Mario Kart was one of the downloadable themes. There were 2 that they announced. So it opens up the potentiality that they're going to announce more of these, like going forward. Like going forward, there would be additional themes that you can download. There is Wi-Fi built into this, so theoretically, this will download directly. You're not going to have to, like upload an SD card or something to do this. So it's really cool tech. But so there's a couple issues with this. First off, it's $99.
Yeah.
Which it seems really expensive for an alarm clock. I have one of those little Alexas with the screen on it. I didn't even spend $99, but like that thing will, tell me the news and the weather and play my music and audio books and stuff for me. So that's even cheaper than this device. And then the other thing is they are monitoring you in your bed. And so like what I said to a friend, I said, Mario's watching you have sex.
No, people in the comments were all on that. They're like, imagine like, having a good time with your partner and you just hear the do.
It's just like you put the picture of whoever face down, you turn Mario around to look at the wall.
Yeah, so, one of the things they do say in this is that if you have other people in bed, that this will not work as well because it can't differentiate between you and somebody else. So it's really designed for single people. It's not really designed for like couples. So like that sort of lowers some of its value potentially for a lot of people. At least the motion sensing, right, isn't designed for that. It would still work as a basic alarm clock.
Well, and it's interesting because the sleep monitoring, Pokemon Sleep does the same thing, which is why I didn't download it. Where like you're supposed to sleep with your phone in, like under your pillow or whatever. That way it can monitor like how you move around during the night and all of that. So I'm like, the fact that they announced this and there's not already a Pokemon Sleep tie-in with it, I'm like, y'all are crazy. But also, who wants that? Like, who wants that?
Yeah, I mean, I think imagine if Xbox released this product. Would people be losing their mind that Microsoft is wanting to spy on me in my sleep? Mm-hmm. Like, what is Microsoft doing with this data that they're collecting on when I'm going to bed, right? How much I'm moving around. Is there somebody else in bed with me? Because theoretically, it could at least register that there are 2 people in bed.
It's like 2 heartbeats.
Yeah. So, like, like I think there are some legitimate, like, maybe not actual privacy concerns, but privacy at least alerts, right? When it comes to this product. And also like $100 is quite a bit of money for an alarm clock that, to be quite fair, doesn't do anything radically different. I mean, you can buy those little sleep monitoring wristwatches and stuff for, I feel like $100. So if you wanted this, that seems maybe easier for people to deal with.
Well, and like you said, you have an Alexa or whatever. You can set your alarm to be the Mario music if you really want to.
Right.
Like.
Yeah. So it's neat. It is a sort of throwback to Nintendo's early days. A lot of people don't know, before they got into video games really in the 80s, that Nintendo was a toy company. That's what they made. Playing cards first, but then into toys. So like this is where Nintendo continuing that tradition. And I think that's interesting. I like Nintendo when they're weird. Like I like Nintendo when they do weird stuff like this. This reminds me a lot of like Labo, that like where you could make things out of cardboard and like put your Switch controllers into it and everything, which never really took off, but I thought it was really weird and interesting that Nintendo would make that.
Justin, I don't think you can say I like Nintendo when they're weird and then complain that they're watching you sleep.
I don't always like the weird stuff that Nintendo does, but I like that they do weird stuff. Like, I mean, even Ring Fit Adventure, right? Like, I have one Ring Fit Adventure. I think that thing's really conceptually neat, and I like that Nintendo is taking swings like that. I like when Nintendo, like, I think Nintendo has maybe, we'll find out when they announce the Switch 2, has maybe finally learned, like, the hardware itself doesn't have to be crazy, but we can do crazy stuff surrounding it, which is what they used to do, right? Like the Rob the Robot or, the Power Pad on the original NES. A lot of those devices, those peripherals were really weird, but like the actual console was exactly what you wanted. It played your basic games. And I think the Switch, they did that. Like the Switch played your basic games, but then they did some like weird stuff around it with Labo and Ring Fit Adventure. And so
the Mario Kart, there was like this,
right.
Was it circuit or something like that?
Yeah, the radio controlled cars. Yeah, like to me that stuff's incredible. Like I like it when Nintendo's being weird like that because Microsoft and Sony don't get weird like that. And so like even if I do. So even when I don't like the product, even when it's something I'm not going to buy, I'm not going to buy this Alarma unless after it comes to retail, it gets marked down like those radio controlled cars do. And it's like, yeah, it's $30. Then like maybe I am buying it just as a novelty to like own. But like I like Nintendo experimenting and being weird because I think the game industry is better because Sega used to be that way, and that Sega is dead. That used to be weird. Really today Sega only gets weird with their Sonic games, and like sometimes,
because it gets a little weird sometimes.
Yeah, but like a lot of their games are exactly what you would expect, and so I like it. I like that old style of games, and I feel like Nintendo does that still better than anyone.
Agreed.
So yeah, that's $99 if you're interested in an Alarmo. I would really I'm very excited to hear the reviews when this thing comes out.
I also really want to hear the reviews from people with pets.
Right. That was one of the things they said. Not only like somebody else in bed, but like your pet's in bed.
Yeah, I'm like, I can just imagine like, being the middle of the night and Wesley just like, walking around on the bed and whatever and just because it senses movement and thinks I'm awake. I'm like, no, it's the cat. Shut up.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that will work for it, but yeah. Let's see. Staying on Nintendo, Nintendo has announced a Switch Online playtest for quote a new feature, and this was something you could sign up to essentially be. I don't think they use this wording, but a beta tester for. They opened this up, and like within like 2 or 3 minutes, all the spots have been filled up. They're going to do a lottery, so even if you did get in, you're not guaranteed a spot in this test. Nobody knows what this is a test for. They say it's a new download that you will have to take onto your Switch, and they are suggesting that you have a wired internet connection for it. So a lot of people have taken that to assume, well, it's going to be something online. And that it's going to be something that requires a steady, like high-end internet connection versus, maybe like wanky Wi-Fi. So they don't want that. So,
and didn't they say too they recommend you play it docked as well?
Yeah. So some people have speculated that this might be some sort of streaming coming to the Switch, and so then it becomes, well, what would they stream? And the biggest suggestion I've seen has been GameCube games, so that the Switch Online would add GameCube games, but they would be streaming only. That the Switch itself couldn't emulate those, which doesn't make sense because they have already done that with Super Mario Sunshine. But maybe it's an issue of not wanting to offer those as full downloads. Like, who knows? It's Nintendo. But nobody knows actually what this is yet. Theoretically, once this beta test starts, Nintendo has said, hey, we want you to be discreet about this, but that'll leak out almost immediately.
Yeah.
Well, I saw that there's an NDA for it, so
Yeah.
it might not leak out as much, at least if there's like some serious ramifications for it getting leaked out.
Right.
But yeah.
But in NDAs, when you have a large beta test, are sort of hard to enforce, because how do you find out who leaked it out? Images would be much easier to track than somebody just saying, hey, this is what it is. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is not something that Nintendo normally does. So it makes it feel like it's something bigger than what you might expect it to be. Right.
Yeah.
This is probably not another Tetris 99 type product, one would assume. Because as far as I know, there was no like public beta testing of those. Let's see. Red Dead Redemption and its DLC Undead Nightmare are coming to the PC on October 29th. This is a pretty big announcement. People have wanted these games onto PC for a very long time, so they're actually coming out. The negative side of this is that when they release those remastered versions of Grand Theft Auto 3, Vice City, and San Andreas, those were terrible. So I think the big question will be, are these actually good ports of those games? But I love the original Red Dead Redemption. I think that's a fantastic game. So, depending on the price, I would pick this up on PC to play it again. Let's see. So there's a short seller by the name of Hindenburg Research. So if you're not familiar, short selling a stock is essentially like placing a bet that this stock is going to go down. And if the stock does go down, you make money off of it. If the stock were to go up, then you lose a lot of money in the process. So it's basically gambling with what stocks are going to do. But anyways, Hindenburg Research has apparently developed a pretty good track record over the years of their bets. They released a report talking about Roblox, and basically have accused the developers of Roblox of inflating user metrics, saying that there are more players than there actually are, more users of Roblox than there actually are. And they also specifically called the gaming platform, quote, a pedophile hellscape, and attacked the commitment of the developers to towards user safety, which obviously, if you know anything about Roblox, a huge amount of those players are children.
Remind me, what? And of course, now I can't remember. Was it Roblox that was like, we're going to set up a dating site within us? So that's kind of a little bit of a echo here, isn't it?
Which, when you have a game that the majority of your players are minors, and you're like, we're going to set up a dating service, even though they said that service was only going to be available for people 18 and over.
Like we had this conversation when they said that, of like, that's going to be real, not. How are you going to monitor that for real? How are you going to actually protect the kids playing this game?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the key when people go, oh, well, clergy and teachers are the biggest source of pedophiles. And it's like, well, if you're a pedophile, where are you going to go but somewhere that you have access to children? Yeah. Right? So, like, the professions that give you access to children are going to draw those sorts of people to them. And, like, you look at something like this. Here is a game that has a lot of children online playing it. That is going to draw, the theory at least, right? So that's going to draw those people to it. When you are a company that is turning that into a dating service, that seems dangerous. Yeah. Not well thought through. And so this is what this group is calling them out on, that among other things. There was a recent report that I read about Roblox, and I don't think we ever talked about it here on the podcast, but was talking specifically about the idea that Roblox, that it was not making money, right? That for all this success and everything, they were spending so much money to continue developing and everything that it wasn't this cash cow like maybe people assume it is. And this doesn't seem like it's going to help. So like seeing those two things in fairly rapid succession feels like where one of these platforms starts to unravel, and that we may be seeing the beginning of the end for Roblox.
Yeah.
Which sounds crazy because there are still, millions of users, maybe not as many millions as they have advertised, but there are still millions of people playing this on a regular basis. So it doesn't feel like it's going to collapse tomorrow. But if I was a parent, I would be very hesitant letting my child play this at this point. Certainly, right? Like we don't want to oversell. I don't want to scare people, but it just feels like something where.
Well, but it's a concern that we and others raised before, and so having it now be raised again in an official allegation by another company feels like there's some weight to it.
Yeah, it feels like this is more problematic than has been led on in the past. And certainly parents should be aware of that. And, I would say anybody like thinking of working, right? Like a lot of developers had taken to, we're going to develop games specifically within this Roblox world because you can make a lot of money if your game becomes super popular. So we'll see what happens with that, but more bad news for Roblox. Let's see. Star Wars Episode 1, Jedi Power Battles, which is the most ridiculous title ever for a video game, or certainly in the consideration. They are doing a remaster of that. It is coming January 23rd to consoles and PC. It seemed like it's coming to pretty much all the consoles, Switch, PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. This is one of those games that came out in the wake of Episode 1 originally releasing. They did sort of like a big blitz of games. There's like the official game adaptation, the Phantom Menace game. There's Episode 1 Racer, which is a fantastic game. And then now there was this game as well, and now they're putting it out as a remaster. They've in recent years, done these sort of remasters of like the Dark Forces first-person shooters. Mm-hmm. They did one of Episode 1 Racer. They've done this of, the Knights of the Old Republic games. This is the same company, Aspire, who is doing this remaster port. So it's not a remake of the game. It is a remaster where they're going to touch it up a little bit. It is going to have all the characters unlocked to start with. But this is cool for people who are fans of this. I don't know if either of you played this game.
I never played it. I know a friend who played it. I watched him play it on the Dreamcast. And there are parts of that game that are pretty rough. When I saw this, I was like, it's always fascinating what games get a remaster, because this is not one that I would have ever thought. Outside of it being Star Wars, and Star Wars obviously being very popular, this is not a game I ever thought would get a remaster.
Well, it feels like Aspire is just working their way through the Star Wars back catalog at this point. Like they put out that port of, The Force Unleashed, but it was specifically the Wii version of these Force Unleashed that they put out a remaster for the Switch. So it's not the good version. Like the Wii version is apparently really weird because it was underpowered at the time, right? Because it's the Wii. So apparently it's kind of a weird version of that game. I never played it. I played on the Xbox 360 or something. I played that game. but they put out a remaster of that, which is weird, right? Like, why the Switch is good enough to run an Xbox 360 game? Why not put out a remaster of that better version of the game? So yeah, it seems like they're just burning their way through that catalog, and they did a lot of the good games, and now they're moving on to.
Yeah, I guess I think like
they did that Bounty Hunter game.
Oh yeah. I just kind of wonder, like, I've again, Star Wars fans are Star Wars fans, and they love Star Wars.
Yep. Star Wars fans are their own beasts.
I guess this is just one of those things that is this a game that people have ever called for a remaster of?
Yeah.
You know, like because they never did a remaster of like Rogue Squadron, did they?
No.
I know they did it.
No.
They did a fairly recent release of Rogue Squadron, but like a new Squadron game. But like that's one where I was like, I don't know, like that's one that I feel like people remember and have some nostalgia for. There are multiple games in the like Squadron series.
There's that GameCube one, which is actually a fantastic game.
Yeah, I've only ever played the N64 game, and
those are good.
That it's got its moments, but like it's still a pretty fun game, and so yeah, it's just one that I sure go for it, I guess.
I don't know your guys' like age, if you fall into the right age bracket for this, but I feel like there's been a resurgence of Episode 1, the prequel trilogy nostalgia.
Yeah,
it's like right below my age, because my best friend's little sister is like obsessed with the prequels, because she's like, these are the ones I grew up on, like these are, and I'm like,
I mean, I would say that like those are the ones that I would probably have the most familiarity with as well, are the prequel trilogy. And so like to an extent I get it for that reason. I just feel like there are others that I think would make more sense.
Yeah. This is I've never heard of this game.
I remember when this game released, just because I thought it had such a goofy title. I remember laughing at this game when it came out.
Yeah, the first time I had heard of it was a few months ago when a friend was streaming it.
Yeah.
The Dreamcast version of it.
I probably had forgotten about it, but like I instantly remembered, oh, right, that was that stupid titled Star Wars game. Right up there, like stupid in a different way than Masters of Terrakasi was as a title. Like I think you bring up a good point, right? Like at some point, like some of these remasters make sense. We talked about the Soul Reaver remasters that they were doing. That made a whole lot of sense because there are people who still talk very fondly about those games. I think you're right. Like, I don't know if I've ever heard anyone say something fond about Jedi Power Battles. That doesn't mean those people don't exist.
Yeah.
But it's certainly not a game that you hear brought up in the same way.
It's not like Knights of the Old Republic where people were begging for that
remember,
for years.
remember Jedi Power Battles, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think at some point, right, like you run out of those games.
Mm-hmm.
You run out of the good games to remaster, and at some point you're just putting out whatever you can find, which is like it's not entirely a bad thing. Like, from a preservation standpoint, the fact that people are going to be able to play this today is good.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not necessarily the Star Wars game you should lead with.
Yeah.
And maybe was looking it up because was just wondering what it was originally on. So it was originally on the PlayStation and the Dreamcast, and there was a Game Boy Advance version. And so like, I mean, maybe at first I thought like, oh, if this was like just on the Dreamcast, maybe like, well, we want more people to play this or have had an opportunity, but like had a PlayStation version as well. So maybe that's just.
This is for those N64 kids.
Sure, yeah.
Who missed out originally. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I can't say anything about the quality of the game other than I don't remember it being a game that was talked about super fondly at the time or since then. So, that's my experience. I've never actually played this game. Episode 1 Racer, though. That was a good game at the time. Let's see. So Christina's not here.
So we're talking about Until Dawn, as always.
Like, we're always talking about something Christina coded that she's not here for. Until Dawn, the new movie, has finished filming. So they put out that game like last week, and now the film is finished. So theoretically, I would imagine that film is being released sometime next year. Mm-hmm. That game has not gotten a super positive response, that remake that they did. But it makes a whole lot of sense that they did that remake when you think they're putting this movie out. So you go see the movie, and now there's a game available on PlayStation 5 and PC if you really love the movie. We'll see if the movie's actually any good. But I feel like also it's a horror film, right? Like, there's nothing... There is a plot. There is something. There are unique elements to that. But, this is sort of like we're going to make a Resident Evil movie. And it's like, well, that's just a zombie movie.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's nothing. We'll talk about that in a second with another movie that they're making. There's nothing that particularly strikes me as unique about it.
It's not even like, making the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. Okay, that was a whole generation's introduction to jump scare games and creepy animatronics.
And that had a high concept. That was, what if Chuck E. Cheese was haunted?
Yeah.
Right? Like, everybody understood that. You could explain that game or that film very quickly and easily. And there's something appealing about taking something so wholesome and sweet as Chuck E. Cheese, which we can argue whether it really is, but and turning that into a horror film.
Yeah.
So this doesn't have that same sort of appeal.
Yeah.
But hopefully it's good.
At least for Christina's sake, if nothing else.
Yeah. I feel like this is going to be another one of those outings of ours. Speaking of other outings that we might be taking, Universal Pictures and Sega are teaming up to make a Shinobi movie. So Shinobi is just a ninja. There's no real story to Shinobi.
I'll say Mario and I have a class together where there's one student who did his first presentation on Naruto and has talked a lot about that. So I see Shinobi and I'm just like, Naruto?
Yeah, I mean, I like those games, but they are just, I feel like in the 80s, people were obsessed with ninjas. That was the era of American Ninja, the series of films and everything. And
and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Right. And every video game had a ninja in it, whether it made sense or not.
One of the UFO 50 games I played was a ninja game.
Yeah.
And I think the little blurb was at the height of Ninja-Mania.
Yeah. I mean, it really was. I think that's one of the things it's hard to understand, looking back if you weren't alive during that time. But popular culture was full of ninja stuff. Mm-hmm. That was the era where everyone owned a ninja star. You had a throwing star, whether you were taking karate classes or not. You owned a throwing star.
And Ninja Gaiden would have been a little after that. Is that 87, 88, something like that? But so maybe still right about that time.
Yeah, I mean, Ninja Gaiden falls very much into that era. Yeah.
Well, even coming back to G.I. Joe, Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow.
Right. Yes. So you have this show about military people, and everybody has guns and bazookas, but then there's this guy with a sword. And he is the most badass character because that's all he needs is that sword. I think he also had a gun, but he didn't use it as much. And speaking of Snake Eyes, the coolest thing about Snake Eyes to me as a kid was that he had a wolf as his companion. And so when I think of Shinobi, what was really cool, I'm a huge fan of Shadow Dancer, which is the Shinobi game on the Genesis. It was an arcade game first, where you have a dog and you can sick your dog on enemies, and your dog will run across the screen and jump on them, and then you can run up and attack them. I think that game's really cool. I really love that game. But anyways.
So if there's no dog in this movie, we riot.
Well, I sort of think okay, well, that's something kind of unique about a ninja film, right? If you had this pet dog and you're going through and I feel like today with CGI, they could like do that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's something that makes it stand out. But if you're just telling me you're going to make a ninja game into a movie, I'm sort of like, what's the hook? What makes this different? Yeah, like, hey, I'm always game for a ninja movie because I grew up in the 80s watching those. But like, what makes this unique, right? Like, there's nothing unique about Shinobi. You know, it's like if you were making a Contra movie, well, at least they're battling aliens, right? So it's really just a Contra. It really ends up just being a Predator movie, right? That's what that ends up being at the end of the day. So like, what makes this? You know, like if you told me you were making a movie of Akari warriors, well, that's just Rambo. Like there's nothing that makes that unique as a property that stands out. So I don't know what makes a Shinobi movie. Like, what is the pitch there? I mean, like they're making
nostalgia. It's nostalgia
Yeah.
is the pitch.
I guess so. I mean, you know, I know we've talked about on here. They licensed Streets of Rage to make a movie of Streets of Rage. Streets of Rage is just a side-scroller beat 'em up. It's like, we're going to make a movie of Final Fight. Well, what is that movie? It's just like people walking through a city beating people up. There's no plot or anything. The mayor's daughter has been kidnapped. We're going to beat everyone up. I mean, that's the Warriors.
There's your plot right there. Somebody's got to be in love with the mayor's daughter.
Well, I mean, that is the plot of the game.
But then you've got to bloat it out to 2.5 hours with annoying flashbacks.
Right. You know, like Streets of Rage, like the thing that was a cool game, but like the thing that kind of makes that stand out now is the soundtrack. And so you almost need that sort of soundtrack to have any sort of connection, or else it's just it's Streets on Fire or something. Like we've already had those movies made. Those movies were made in the 70s and 80s, those sort of like exploitation films. So like what makes that something that draws people to the theater today? You know, like for all we like bash Borderlands, at least there was a gimmick there that made that kind of stand out. And look, it sounds like I'm really down on this. I am always, like I said, I'm always game for more ninja movies.
And game for more game movies.
Well, sometimes. But I just don't know what makes this one stand out. Same thing with Until Dawn, because, you know, that is so much aping like slasher films. Like it's just you're making another slasher film at some point. Let's see. Speaking of Sega, like some better news out of Sega. Sega is working on an Alien Isolation sequel. So this is the, if you don't remember, this was the first-person Alien game where the aliens would stalk you through the game. And like you would have to hide when an alien came into the room. So there are videos you can watch online of this if you don't have the opportunity to play it. But like you are trying to hide under a table while an alien is stalking you, and the aliens will actually look under the table to see if you're under there.
Yikes.
So it's a fantastic horror game. It's the best Alien game they ever made. So it's really cool to see that they're making a sequel to it. I feel like that game didn't sell extremely well at the time, but maybe over the long run, it's done enough in sales. They feel like they can do a sequel now.
I feel like that's got like a cult following to it.
Yeah.
And so I could definitely, that one is not surprising that it is getting a sequel, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's just from like knowing people who have played it and who really love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little surprising to me, but I also feel like it is one of those games that is extremely deserving of a sequel. Because that first one is so good, you want to see, can they improve on that formula any?
I do think that the timing is a little unfortunate. They should have probably lined it up with the new movie that came out a little better, but oh well.
They do have that TV series that's coming
okay.
out, like Alien Earth is maybe the title of that.
I didn't know that, but okay.
Me either.
That's like an FX show, I feel like. And then theoretically, that movie did pretty well. So
I was going to say, I know people really enjoyed the movie.
Yeah.
You said you saw it?
Yeah. I like the first half of that movie quite a bit. And then the second half just like a greatest hits of Alien. So it lost a little for me, but I know a lot of people love it, like all the way through. And I think it did well enough at the box office. And like I feel like they made that relatively cheap. Because at one point, I think that was supposed to be like a straight to streaming movie. And after that Predator movie did so well on streaming, they were like, hey, we're just going to put this out in theaters. And I feel like it did well financially because it was such a cheaply made film. And I don't mean that. It looks very good. It's a very good looking film. It doesn't look cheap, but like
inexpensive.
Yeah. It wasn't the Joker sequel that they spent $200 million on and are now taking a bath on that movie. Alicia, how do you really feel about the Joker sequel?
I refuse to watch it.
Yeah,
is it out officially?
Yeah.
This is the problem.
Well, I know I've seen trailers for it. I've seen people are saying it's not good, but I didn't know if it like actually is out widely.
Yeah.
I hated the first one so much. Not even Lady Gaga can get me to see this one.
Yeah, it came out last weekend and underperformed.
I read the wiki page. That's good enough.
I sort of want to see it because the fans who love the first one hate this one so much. Like, and I'm like, Alicia, I did not like that first movie. Like, in part because, like, well, there's part of me that's like, okay, it's not Joker. I can sort of accept that it's the sort of Elseworld version, but like, also it's like so derivative of other films.
I was gonna say it's not Joker and it's not original at all.
Right. So I think that first film is way overblown and hyped.
Yeah.
But I know people liked it. There's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of those people, like, I feel like really leaned into the misogyny and not getting that film was critical of that behavior.
Yep.
So the fact that this film made those people furious sort of makes me want to see it because I don't want to do any spoilers because I don't know exactly what happens in it, but I know a lot of people came away from this like, hey, this film feels like it's a big fuck you to everybody who liked the first film. And I'm like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
I kind of felt that way.
I do think I'll probably watch it at some point when it's on streaming.
Yeah.
But mainly to laugh at all the arguing that over whether or not it was a musical. And it's like, yeah, the way you've described it, it's totally a musical. I'm here for that, honestly. A Joker musical movie would be awesome.
Yeah. My
Theoretically.
Yeah.
My favorite thing is on social media, people have been putting the Prince video for Bat Dance. And they're like, this is the Joker musical we wanted.
I don't know. I'm still a big fan of Holy Musical Batman by StarKid. That's the musical I really want.
Let's see.
We've gotten off track.
That's okay. This whole podcast has been off track. I feel like Christina is the one who keeps us like on the straight and narrow.
I don't know. I think
Justin's
it's
caffeine.
I was gonna say I think it's the caffeine.
Caffeinated Justin.
Yeah, but I feel like Christina could like check me on that.
Would she?
I don't know. I feel like it might be even more. Christina would embrace the chaos.
Yeah, I was saying maybe she could, but would she?
I mean, I was trying to give her credit, but like, OJ would definitely embrace the chaos.
I'd say OJ would embrace the chaos.
Let's see. Sony is selling refurbished PlayStation 5s starting at $350.
Finally, one I could possibly afford.
Which I think this is like maybe $50 off if you're looking at the digital only version of the system.
That sounds right.
But still, this is getting cheaper systems out there into the market, which I feel like they desperately need at this point to continue to expand adoption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like these systems are too expensive if you want to broadly expand adoption.
Yeah. No, I'm genuinely looking at this and going, this could be a good, like, hey, now I'm ABD present for myself. Now that's $350 rather than $500.
Speaking of things that are $50 off that are also connected to Sony, I ended up buying a PlayStation Portal because it was on sale. So we talked about, who is this for? Me, apparently. Me is the answer to that question.
Look, I am not walking across this apartment to play my PlayStation 5.
I don't spend all that much time in my front room because I'm usually in a call at my computer with friends, and so I was like, well, fine.
I mean, you own a Steam Deck that could also stream.
But not my PlayStation 5 games. I'm not streaming Astro Bot on my Steam Deck.
No, that would be crazy. You need a dedicated device to do that.
Yeah, like I said, because it was on sale, and I had been thinking about it, and when it was on sale, I was like, all right, sure.
So, do you like it?
I haven't. It hasn't come in yet. I think it's going to come in tomorrow.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So,
It'd be Mario's deal of the week.
Well, I don't know if it still exists, but it was Mario's deal of whatever that 30 minutes was on Amazon.
was this part of their Prime deals?
I think so.
Prime Day sale. Yeah, I'll be interested to hear your reactions to it because, that was a device. I thought, oh, this is dumb. Nobody's going to buy this. This is going to bomb horribly. And then it's been incredibly successful. Mm-hmm. I think more successful than anybody within the industry outside of Sony ever thought that thing would be.
Yeah.
So people like it, right? So I'm apparently wrong about that device. People really like it, and so I'm interested to hear what you think on it. Let's see. So I think that, like Alicia, you are that target demographic for these, right?
I am, absolutely.
Those people who need another $50 to $100 off the price to like really justify investing. And I get that. I really think they need a model of PlayStation 5 down at $300.
Yeah, that's probably when I'll actually get it, is because now that this is here, I'm like, well, probably Black Friday they'll bring it down to $300. So that's probably when I'll actually get one.
I'd be interested this Black Friday to see what sort of deals we might see on PlayStation 5s. Particularly because that Slim is a diskless system and everything. I just wonder if we might see some really good deals to move that hardware this Christmas. Mm-hmm. And again, I sort of feel like at this point they need to expand the market, right? To get more of those systems out there.
Yeah.
Let's see. Little Big Planet 3 is getting delisted from the PlayStation Store. This was the last Little Big Planet game. So you will no longer be able to buy this. You can re-download it if you've already purchased it, but it will no longer be allowed to be purchased. I think they have already shut down the servers for that game, or maybe they are shutting down the servers. So I guess you won't be able to download user-created levels, but you could continue playing and making your own levels.
I was thinking, this is the one that was released for the PlayStation 5? No, that was Sackboy's Adventure or something like that.
Yeah, and that is not user-created levels.
That's why I was, when you had said the latest one, I was like, okay, but that's a different thing.
Yeah, the latest Little Big Planet game, but not the latest game starring Sackboy.
Sure.
Let's see. Saudi Arabia has reduced their stake in Nintendo. So there were rumors out that Saudi Arabia was looking to up their stake in Japanese companies, Japanese video game developers. And so that rumor kind of got a lot of people concerned since they already owned a significant portion of Nintendo, 8.5%, which is, not a controlling stake, but a pretty significant stake in the company. And instead of actually upping their stake in Nintendo, they actually decreased it by about 1%. So they went from 8.58% to 7.54%. This is, when we say Saudi Arabia, this is their public investment, the government's public investment arm. So obviously this is not like everybody in Saudi Arabia. This is the government specifically that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And this is just kind of interesting. Like a lot of people, Saudi Arabia investing in video game companies has made a lot of people kind of uncomfortable because of the government's track record with, certainly the murder of an American journalist, some of their human rights issues, their treatment of women. People worry about, not wanting to give money to a company that will then benefit the Saudi Arabian government. So they have decreased that stake in Nintendo. I feel like lots of people view that as positive news. Let's see. Google has been ordered to carry third-party app stores. In response to that, Microsoft plans to release an Xbox app that will allow you to buy Xbox games directly through the app. So this is going to be like kind of their own third-party store app. This is what Xbox wants on the PlayStation. This is what Epic Games wants. On iOS, on the iPhone. So they're getting that on Google. Let's see. 343 Industries, the makers of the Halo franchise, ever since Bungie left. This was the studio that Microsoft spun up to take over that franchise after Bungie. They have rebranded themselves as Halo Studios, which makes a whole lot of sense. They are switching to the Unreal Engine. That's the big news. So the Halo series had always been developed on an internally developed engine. They are now switching over to Unreal Engine 5. And as part of this announcement, they released some demo footage that they say is not from any game that's actually being worked on, but to kind of show off what they can do with the Unreal Engine 5. So it's mostly kind of like some flyovers of environments. They showed like 3 different environments and did like flyovers saying this is what a future game could look like. And yeah, they also announced that they're working on multiple projects as part of this. So if you didn't follow the news with the last Halo game, Halo Infinite, one of the big concerns about that game was the multiplayer, that there weren't enough maps for it. And apparently part of the reason for that was that the development tools that they had internally at 343 Industries made developing new maps really difficult, especially in a timely manner. So they released that game. Remember, the multiplayer component was free to play, but then like the progression of new maps coming out for that as a free to play game was at a trickle. Like they just weren't getting them out in any sort of timely fashion. They weren't doing updates to the game in a timely fashion. And apparently that was blamed, internally on the engine, that it just wasn't designed to iterate on super quickly. The Unreal Engine obviously powers a huge portion of games that are made today. It seems much more amenable to that kind of iteration and turning over new level designs and everything at a quick pace. Theoretically, this also allows them to hire in people who will kind of hit the ground running, because if you know Unreal Engine, you're already going to be ready.
So you don't have to get trained in on
a unique
system.
Game engine.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this feels like something that needed to be done. I think the bigger issue here is, like, where does Halo go from here? Like, what does a new Halo game look like?
Obviously, they show you Master Chief's dog and his butt.
Look, we've already seen his butt. Like, I don't know, we need to see it again. But, yeah, I just don't know. The Halo franchise feels like it's in a really odd spot. It feels like it's in its most irrelevant spot ever.
Yeah.
Like, that used to be the premier franchise on the Xbox. That's what the original Xbox launched with. That was the system seller.
Yeah.
It was the killer app for that system.
It's like it used to be. I remember when I feel like all of like elementary and middle school, everybody was playing COD and everybody was playing Halo.
Right.
Like those were the two. And now it's like the only Halo thing I can think of is making fun of the TV show.
Right, yeah. I mean, and I really liked Halo Infinite. I think that game is actually a good game. But the multiplayer in that game fell off a cliff. Mm-hmm. Like, people just abandoned it really quickly. And I don't know what people want, because there are people like, like your age growing up with that series who played the original Halo games, or me, I was playing those games, the original release when I was in college. There are people who are playing those games that sort of have this like nostalgia for those games, but like nobody really wants to go back and play Halo 2 or 3 at this point. I don't feel like releasing a game that played like Halo 3 today would be a really weird project. Because I think multiplayer games have moved on from that. Like games play differently. Those games are really slow and plodding. Just part of the, it's part of what made them feel distinct at the time. But I don't think you can release a game that plays like that today. And like also like outside of Call of Duty, there aren't a whole lot of multiplayer shooters that aren't like service-based games today. Like, I'm trying to think of a multiplayer shooter that's super popular today that isn't, a Fortnite or something like that. So I don't know what the future of Halo looks like. I mean, there's part of me that almost feels like a new Halo needs to almost be a complete departure or a complete reboot.
Yeah.
Because there's almost like a generation of kids who have no experience with those games at this point. Let's wrap it up there because we are just about out of time. So let's move on to our big question. And our big question for today is, since we're headed into Halloween here soon, what video game character would you consider dressing for for Halloween? And Mario, what video game character would you consider dressing as for Halloween?
So there's this character called Edward Scissorhands from the game Fortnite. Honestly, I have no idea. I've never been a big dress up for Halloween person, so there wasn't one that really stood out. I think it was last year, 2 years ago. I said the wise old man from RuneScape, so it might still be that.
I feel like that's a deep dig right there. All right, Alicia, how about you?
I feel like I would probably dress as one of the Turks from Final Fantasy VII, mainly because that would be a really easy costume to put together. But I also feel like I'd have people think I'm dressed as the Men in Black. So I don't know.
Oh, yeah, I could see that. Well, either way, I mean, you could be who you're going to be for whatever audience that you interact with.
A true story.
It's better than that costume where everybody's like, "You're what? Like, what are you?" I don't recognize you at all. So my answer was just Simon Belmont because then I get to carry a whip around.
I almost said Franziska von Karma for the same reason.
Like we're on a college campus, so like you can't actually carry weapons around, something that could be perceived as a weapon even. I know that's always an issue every Halloween, like you can't carry fake guns around. I know it's a whip. It's not a weapon. But like I don't know if you could
Debatable.
I don't know that you could get away with that.
Yeah.
But anyways, like that's pretty cool to have a whip. But also like I'm the person who would be terrified of a whip because I feel like every time I've known somebody who got a whip and then the first time they crack it, they like hit themselves with it.
Yeah.
So like I would have it and be like, here, you can look at it. No, we're not going to actually do anything with it. It's just here for decoration.
No, I have an Indiana Jones whip at home that my mom at least used to know how to actually like crack the whip. And I was like, that is so cool.
I feel like that's one of those weapons that seems really cool. I always tell people like, what's the scariest thing I've ever seen whipping somebody? And it's like, I've seen lots of guns fired and they haven't scared me. But the scariest thing is one of my roommates in college bought a crossbow and it was like one of those little handheld crossbows.
Oh no.
And he took it out behind the house and fired it. And that thing was the scariest thing I've ever seen fired because that thing is far more like, there's far more power and it's faster than you think it is.
Yeah.
And so like he fired it and it like, I think it just terrified all of us. Like, I don't know that he ever fired it again because like firing it just once, you were like, oh, somebody can get killed with this thing really quickly.
Yeah.
And we were being careful, but like even being careful and like being at a distance and aiming at something like had backing it, like we were really careful with it. We still came away like somebody could die. Like with this thing. And I fired like compound bows and stuff, like hunting bows, and even those like didn't scare me as much as that thing. Like it felt like something. This is completely out of control. Somebody's going to die. So yeah. All right, that does it for this week's show. Thank you, Mario and Alicia, for joining me. Thank you for our audience listening. You can always email us questions, comments at justin.young@siu.edu. You can also check out past episodes and other content at salukigames.com. Thank you for spending some time with us. We'll be back soon with another episode. Until then, play something fun and enjoy the week.